Chapter 1.
About Julian, Bishop of Eclanum, and his efforts to spread the Pelagian heresy more widely among the people. Church records and imperial decrees clearly show that Julian, Bishop of Eclanum, was a prominent follower of Coelestius. While Pope Innocent I was alive, who had appointed him as Bishop, Julian worked to mask the damaging effects of the heresy through various deceptive tactics. He tried to disguise his lack of faith with an appearance of piety and charity towards those in need. According to Marius Mercator, Julian, in a bid to gain favor with Pope Innocent, openly condemned Pelagius and Coelestius as traitors to the Catholic faith, without any attempt to hide his words. Indeed, Coelestius and Pelagius were first condemned not by Zosimus, but by his predecessor, the revered Innocent, who had ordained Julian. Following their condemnation, Julian remained in communion with Innocent until his passing, sharing the same genuine beliefs and also condemning Pelagius and Coelestius alongside him. If only Innocent had lived longer, or Julian had passed away before him, the Church might have been spared significant turmoil, and many revered bishops of Campania and Italy, under Julian's influence, would not have compromised the purity of the Catholic faith. Moreover, numerous writings filled with blasphemies and impieties would not have spread as widely without the fervor and aggression of the Bishop of Eclanum. Church records provide us with complete details of what Julian did and attempted to accomplish after Innocent's death. He couldn't hold back his disdain for apostolic teachings any longer and, fueled by anger, began openly teaching the people what he had learned from Coelestius. He didn't hesitate to criticize and make fun of the most holy and knowledgeable bishops of the Catholic Church. He cursed Augustine and the other fathers of Africa, becoming more defiant by the day as he ignored the authority, teachings, and warnings of Pope Zosimus, leading many astray. Finally, he rejected the doctrinal letter from the same Supreme Pontiff, known as the Tractatorian Letter, which was received by all Catholic bishops with the highest respect as a rule of faith, and he boldly refused to sign it along with other bishops. However, he soon faced the consequences of his actions. First, he was removed from the priesthood, then stripped of his bishopric, and finally, by imperial decree, banished from all of Italy. He went into exile among the Easterners, losing hope of ever regaining his own or any other bishop's throne. Meanwhile, other bishops who had joined him in his wrongdoing, fearing the severe and disgraceful punishments, realized it was too shameful not to comply with the Apostolic See's judgments. So, they abandoned Julian and condemned Pelagius and Coelestius, humbly submitting petitions to the Apostolic See, where they were graciously received and reinstated to their positions. However, others who stubbornly refused to fear imperial and ecclesiastical penalties were permanently deposed, stripped of their authority, and exiled beyond Italy's borders. Marius Mercator explained the entire matter with these words at a well-regarded place. The letters of Zosimus were rejected by Julian and his associates, as they refused to align themselves with the same fathers. As a result, they were stripped of their authority by both imperial laws and church statutes, and expelled from all of Italy. Many of them, realizing their mistake, corrected it and humbly returned to the Apostolic See, where they were welcomed back into their churches. These actions of the most holy Pope Zosimus, as recounted by Marius Mercator, offer us a strong opportunity to refute the lies and slanders found in the Discourse on the African Councils, written by Paschasius Quesnellus, who harbored animosity towards the Apostolic See. In his writing, he distorts everything recklessly, harshly criticizing Pope Zosimus for being too lenient with the Pelagians, and vigorously attacking him. He also describes the clergy of the Roman Church as being influenced by Pelagianism, extends the authority of provincial councils in Africa beyond the limits set by divine laws, and attempts not only to elevate but also to undermine the jurisdiction and dignity of the Apostolic See, which the African Fathers greatly revered. But what about these falsehoods? He could boldly impose them only on his followers, not on us, who know very well from Prosper Life of Augustine that the African Fathers, heavily reliant on the judgment of the Apostolic See, never wanted to convene a full synod unless the decree of Pope Zosimus had reached them. In response to this decree, 212 fathers issued 8 canons in full support, which are mistakenly attributed to the Second Council of Milevum. However, as the very learned Petavius states, this Milevitan council decided nothing against the Pelagians, and of those 8 canons, the 3rd, 4th, and 5th are cited by Pope Celestine under the name of the Carthaginian Council. We chose to keep this matter quiet rather than bring it to light, as we don't currently plan to address every lie and deception in the praise dissertation, nor to refute them. Especially since there are plenty of resources available to reject them, already prepared long ago by the esteemed Cardinal Norris in his books on the history of the Pelagians. With his support, we have decided to focus only on those issues that seem relevant to the rise of this heresy, its authors and leaders, and the actions of some Roman pontiffs. By briefly outlining a certain history of events, we aim to pave an easier path for discussing matters concerning Saint Pope Leo, which we will soon begin to explore. However, the other issues relating to the African councils and defending the apostolic seat from any blemish will be addressed elsewhere.
Chapter 2.
Saint Leo the Great's efforts against Julian and the Pelagians ravaging Campania. Returning to our topic, don't think that Julian and his followers faced exile and other punishments so quietly that they didn't try to deceive Pope Celestine and his successor Xystus to absolve them. Also, don't assume that the city, Campania, and other regions of Italy were completely free from the Pelagian influence after Julian and the other bishops were expelled. Julian, first of all, gained the support of Nestorius, the bishop of Constantinople, and attempted to advocate for his cause and that of his companions through deceit and fraud before the Holy Celestine, frequently petitioning to get their bishoprics back. Meanwhile, the Pelagians, scattered and growing in Italy, were encouraged by the hope of having their leaders restored. As a result, they did not stop complaining, causing turmoil, or hurling insults. So, as soon as Celestine died and Xystus took his place, Julian dared to test his faith and apostolic strength by sending petitions, pretending to profess the Catholic faith to have the Pope restore his former episcopal honor and duties. Prosper of Aquitaine recounts this incident in his chronicle, noting that Julian was thwarted by none other than Saint Leo, then the archdeacon of the Roman Church, who used all his strength to ensure the Holy Pope would protect himself and the entire Church from the pretended repentance of the heretic. At this time, Julian of Eclanum, a well-known proponent of the Pelagian error, driven by a strong desire for the bishopric he had lost, attempted to sneak back into the Church's communion through various deceitful means, presenting the appearance of correction. Pope Sixtus, with Deacon Leo's encouragement, swiftly countered these plots, leaving no room for their harmful attempts. He made all the Catholics rejoice over the defeat of the deceitful enemy, as if the apostolic sword had, for the first time, cut down the most arrogant heresy. The esteemed Prosper wrote during the consulship of Theodosius XVII and Festus, which, according to Petavius's tables, corresponds to the year 439 AD, as noted by the eminent Cardinal Norris. Saint Leo, still a deacon, demonstrated remarkable wisdom and insight by immediately recognizing the deceptions and bad faith of these Pelagian leaders. Driven by a strong desire to regain the episcopate they had lost, they demanded to be admitted into the communion of Catholics with all honors and offices, intending to disturb the Church again with new schemes. After addressing these evils with a mind superior to all dangers, Leo decided that the Nestorian and Pelagian heretics should also be challenged in writing. Foreseeing his own divine election to the highest office of the Church, he encouraged Cassian, the presbyter of Marseille, to break his modest silence. With commendable zeal and authoritative affection, he persuaded Cassian to write and publish 7 books against Nestorius on the Incarnation. Moreover, in these books, he showed no favor to the Pelagians, but attacked and defeated them as well. Although Cassian had long completed the spiritual conferences and intended to remain silent, excusing his boldness through modesty and erasing the false stain of being a semi-Pelagian supporter, he emerged from his deep silence at Leo's urging and command. He faced public judgment and took on new work, despite feeling embarrassed about past matters. Indeed, Cassian admitted this in his dedicatory letter to Leo, where he addresses him as follows: "For now, it is more your matter at stake here than mine. Your judgment rather than my duty is at risk. Because, whether I am equal to your command or not, the very nature of obedience and humility excuses me somewhat." Soon after, he adds, "This therefore, is your matter, your business, the work of your honor." Not long after, news spread quickly, faster than anything in such matters, convincing everyone everywhere. And messengers rushed ahead, announcing that Sixtus, the Roman Pope, had passed away. When the Pelagians heard this, they immediately realized that new disasters could be looming over them if Archdeacon Leo were to be elevated to the pontificate. For that reason, they were tormented by great fear and severe dangers, and they anticipated new thunderbolts would be hurled at them, as if from a higher place. Indeed, with these favorable omens, Leo began to govern the Church. To the benefit of the Catholic faith, he immediately declared a great war against all heretics, especially Julian and other Pelagians residing in Campania. While we were settled in Campania in Italy, the venerable and apostolically honorable Leo was overthrowing the Manichaeans and crushing the Pelagians, particularly Julian. I believe those writers should not be listened to, who wrongly derived from Photius's writings that Saint Leo sent Prosper of Aquitaine to Campania against Julian's plots, for Photius did not claim such a thing in his library. In Codex 54, he merely wrote about the Pelagian heresy re-emerging. Not long after, when it began to arise and emerge again impudently from a wicked root, some even spoke freely in Rome in favor of the heresy, whom Prosper, indeed a divine man, easily dispersed and extinguished by publishing pamphlets against them, even while the aforementioned Leo was governing the Roman seat. So, according to Photius, Prosper did not actually overthrow the Pelagians living in Campania, nor was he sent and appointed to that province by Pope Leo, as Usher, Cave, and others believed. Instead, he simply published some booklets against those who openly supported the Pelagian heresy. We believe these words refer to certain individuals who, without understanding the testimonies of Scripture or properly submitting to the judgments of the Apostolic See, sought an empty and pretentious appearance of knowledge while trying to appear as defenders of that heresy. In fact, their behavior is quite similar to what we see today, where certain talkative and loud teachers, not to call them busybodies, often visit public bookshops just to freely criticize and dissect the works and writings of others. They even describe them with slanderous poems, despite their supreme confidence in their intellect. They have no natural right, duty, or any expertise or practice in the sciences to slightly judge such matters. Therefore, St. Prosper curbed the talkativeness and boldness of such people with 4 or at least 3 booklets. Furthermore, knowing that people had grown accustomed to enjoying poems more than prose, he wrote in verse. Among these booklets, the poem on the Ungrateful stands out, in which he not only recounts the series of events of the Church against the Pelagians, but also exposes and refutes all the wicked errors of that heresy. So, couldn't the people and the common folk understand from this style of speech the kind and amount of reverence those decrees of the Apostolic See should be received with, which were already regarded by all the bishops of the churches as tokens of faith? Furthermore, wouldn't the title of this little book alone have been enough to provoke either shame in those who spoke freely about this heresy or spark their curiosity to read it? It suggests a serious criticism of ungrateful minds, which people across all nations have always tended to avoid. If someone is considered ungrateful for not repaying or appreciating the benefits received, how much more so is someone who denies having received those benefits? Acting like the ungrateful, they try to justify their actions and defend their vice. It can hardly be doubted, therefore, that the Pelagians have rightly earned the label of the ungrateful. As Martin Stiart says, no one suffers more from the vice of an ungrateful mind than the one who impiously favors human will over the will and mercy of God. It's as if receiving good, once considered evil, begins not from the highest good but from oneself. However, these arguments seem to be challenged by the eminent Neresius. In Book 2 of the Pelagian History, he wrote about the testimony of Photius as follows. Moreover, there are no books by Prosper against the Pelagians, as Photius refers to them as little books. I think he understood them to be those published in Gaul against the semi-Pelagians, which I have found to have been written before the pontificate of Leo. Against the ungrateful, however, Eusebius alone, without any witness, claims that he wrote that charming poem in Rome on page 380. Should these things be ignored then? Should I always seem eager to engage with the most learned man, as critics and writers on literary matters in Venice once published when our edition of Rufinus first appeared? Should we subscribe to Neresius's conjectures to the point that we appear uncertain in our opinion? May our thoughts never succumb to such a notion. For Photius's testimony is not so weak that it lacks credibility among us and the assembly of the learned. We don't believe it's necessary to strictly adhere to the point of attacking or rejecting the theories and reasoning of the distinguished and learned Cardinal Norris. It would be shameful to harm even slightly the reputation of such a knowledgeable man, who has provided the Catholic world with exemplary studies for the Church, through his works on the Pelagian history and his efforts in preserving ancient monuments. As I reflected on these matters and revisited Photius' testimony, I was inclined to think that the views of both writers could be easily reconciled. This is particularly because Photius never states that while Leo was in Rome, Prosper wrote those pamphlets against the Pelagians. He simply mentions Prosper, truly a divine man, with pamphlets published against them, easily scattered and extinguished them. This way of speaking suggests that Prosper might have taken the opportunity in Rome to publish those pamphlets he may have written earlier against the Pelagians. Anyone who pays attention to Photius' words at 289 will understand this. Additionally, it's important to remember that Prosper wasn't in the habit of sharing his writings indiscriminately. At that time, there weren't enough manuscript codices for them to be widely circulated. Therefore, it's plausible to think that Prosper, perhaps the author in Gaul according to Norris, eventually published them in Rome to effectively counter the Pelagians. This idea is supported by Jerome's letter to Florentius, which we discussed in the edition of Eusebius. We noted there was a significant exchange of books between Jerome and Rufinus. Jerome earnestly requests Florentius, upon hosting their mutual friend Rufinus, to ensure he sends the commentaries of the Blessed Redicus, Bishop of Autun, on the Song of Songs. Furthermore, someone named Paul the Elder from Rufina is requesting the return of Tertullian's manuscript, along with the interpretation of the Psalms of David and a very lengthy book about the synods by St. Hilary, which Jerome himself hand-copied in Trier. From this letter, we see that manuscripts of works by the Church Fathers were so rare in the 5th century that even the wealthiest individuals, or those willing to endure the tiring work of scribes, could barely obtain copies. Even if we admit that the works of Prosper, which Photius discussed, were written by the author in Gaul, what was there to stop them from being published later for the common good? Indeed, those who aim to interpret Photius's words according to grammatical rules will agree with us that they convey no other meaning. Did Photius, who is praised here, suggest anything other than that Saint Prosper brought great clarity and assistance to the truth by spreading these writings, which easily calmed all public unrest and fostered, confirmed, and increased the piety and religion of Catholics? And certainly, the public itself, even if not well versed in church matters and not easy to obey the authority of a teacher, most often, if free from necessary tasks and concerns, does not refuse to listen to those speaking against it. Captivated by these talks like a lure, when it comes to the strictness of justice, the public becomes suspicious of the judge's fairness or integrity, often makes incorrect judgments about the accused crimes, and, moved by a certain compassion for the condemned, both because of the punishments they endure and because it is repelled by them, does not hesitate to criticize the most holy leaders of the Church harshly. Saint Prosper likely aimed to address these issues to support the piety and religion of the people, as we mentioned, and to inspire them. It makes sense that he wanted to critique the Pelagians' customs and practices with serious verses, so the people wouldn't be misled and would be encouraged to seek and understand the truth. He is believed to have presented the sequence and nature of events, highlighting the impiety and errors of the Pelagians, for the purpose of later praising divine grace, celebrating the faith and piety of the Catholic Church, and ultimately turning the deeds, doctrines, defeats, destruction, and disgrace of the heretics into a song. The success of this endeavor is evident through his famous poem on the Ungrateful and 3 other booklets released to the public, as praised by Photius, whether Saint Prosper wrote these works well before or during the pontificate of Leo the Great.
Chapter 3.
On the time when Saint Prosper wrote his works against the Pelagians. It might seem like we're drifting from our main topic if we try to pinpoint the exact timing of these writings. However, I felt it necessary to address this, as I've noticed previous writers have made mistakes in dating them. The poem on the Ungrateful shouldn't be dated to 429 or the year after, nor should the 2 epigrams against Augustine's critic be dated back to 417 or 418, as some writers have claimed. This is mainly inferred from Prosper himself, who starts the poem on the Ungrateful by mentioning the complete eradication of the Pelagian plague. What would be the point of Prosper words if the Church's enemy hadn't been defeated and was still causing trouble in Campania and other parts of Italy? Moreover, how could Prosper have claimed that the Church had fully triumphed over the Pelagians if their leader Julian could still cause disturbances in Constantinople, Italy, and Gaul, repeatedly attempting to infiltrate the Catholic community? Such statements shouldn't be only linked to the synods of Africa or the decrees of Pope Innocent. From church records, we know Julian hadn't yet openly fallen into heresy but was rather trying to mask his errors under a guise of religion and piety. Nor can Prosper words be taken to refer to Pope Zosimus's constitution or the decrees of the Council of Ephesus, as during the times of Popes Sixtus and Leo, Julian and other Pelagian leaders were causing new trouble, striving to regain their episcopal seats, honors, and ministries. Therefore, it seems to us that Prosper poems fit best in the time of Sixtus or St. Leo. While we can't definitively say this poem was written during the age of Leo, it does seem to describe the complete downfall of the Pelagian followers and mentions the end of the war, the victory achieved, and the peace that followed. So, such a guess shouldn't be entirely dismissed, as readers can determine from Prosper's own poems. The pure love in Christ's people, inspired from above, motivates me to go beyond my own abilities and to inspire pious minds with song. This is to prevent a complacent peace from dulling minds, secure after the notable victory of the war is over, as if no threat remains from the enemy once defeated, or as if the head of the crushed serpent no longer pulses with venom. If someone argues that this statement was made by Photius, even in Rome, some openly supported the heresy, specifically Pelagianism, which Prosper, a truly divine man, effortlessly dispelled and extinguished with his publicly published books, and if this cannot be proven by just one poem about the Ungrateful, I won't strongly object. Although this work is called Booklets, it was divided by the author into 4 equal parts, each with its own distinct theme, as shown by the esteemed D. Antonius Silanus, a regular canon, in embellishing the works of St. Prosper. Since this type of writing includes satirical verses aimed at criticizing and attacking the bad behavior and habits of others, it rightly took on the name of booklets from common usage. However, to avoid appearing overly opposed to Norris, I'll set aside these minor conjectures and turn my attention to the other 3 booklets that Prosper also published against the Pelagians. As mentioned, Prosper composed 2 other epigrams against the detractor of St. Augustine, to which he added the well-known epitaph of the Nestorian and Pelagian heresies. Prayers of that nature would have been completely out of place if Augustine hadn't reached his final days, or if those heresies hadn't been fully extinguished. In reality, those 2 heresies weren't fully resolved until after Augustine's passing. The editors of Prosper, understanding the significance of this point, argued that the epitaph against the Nestorians and Pelagians was written later. They specifically dated it to the year 432, after Augustine had passed away, when those 2 heresies were condemned at the Council of Ephesus. However, regarding the other booklets, strong evidence suggests this conclusion. Who would believe that while Augustine was still alive, anyone else would take on the role of defending his teachings? Wouldn't the holy doctor himself, for as long as he lived, be prepared to confront his opponents, either gently or with harsh criticism? It's very likely that Augustine, who corrected the monks of Adrumetum for misinterpreting his writings, who persistently challenged Pelagius and Julian, and who defended his doctrine against Jerome's objections, I suggest that this Augustine wouldn't have left those new Pelagian criticisms unaddressed, or at least he would have acknowledged Prosper, his defender. He would have done so if he had been alive when Prosper wrote those praised booklets. Moreover, Prosper's 2 letters to Augustine strongly support our assumptions. They show that Cave, Usher, John Oliver, and other editors of Prosper made a significant mistake in dating those booklets if we thoroughly examine the timing of the letters and consider their arguments. Cave believed they were written in the year 426. The latest editor of these letters suggests they were penned at the end of 428 or the start of 429, as noted in the margin on page 89. When we look at the content of the letters, Prosper openly testifies that the remnants of the Pelagian heresy had spread in Gaul and many other regions. He also notes that there were major complaints against Augustine's works, particularly the doctrine explained in the book on correction and grace. Who would assert that Prosper had already written the poem on the ungrateful along with other celebrated works by Photius when he composed these letters? Didn't he address the most serious and challenging questions raised by the Pelagians, which he wanted clarified? As if uncertain about many things, he was seeking enlightenment from Augustine's new writings. In Prosper's earlier letter, he mentions that nearly all of Gaul was disturbed when he wrote it, and he sought to gain knowledge through the wisdom of the Holy Father. To benefit many, he appealed, writing, "Grant us in this matter, most blessed Pope, best Father, as much as you can with the help of the Lord, the diligence of your piety, so you may see fit to explain with the clearest expositions, those questions that are darker and more difficult to understand." He immediately presents 10 arguments of these very serious questions. Meanwhile, fearing to rush into open debate against so many opponents distinguished by honors and merits, and to fight against them, he holds back his fervor with silence until he can obtain a response from Augustine. With all these matters clarified, thus begins the last chapter of his letter, and many additional insights related to this cause, which you can see with deeper insight. We believe and hope that not only will our weakness be strengthened by the support of your arguments, but also those obscured by the darkness of this opinion, despite being distinguished by merits and honors, will receive the purest light of grace. Prosper couldn't attack Augustine's detractors with his poems or fully celebrate the victory over the Pelagians if he himself was stuck in various doubts, wondering whether the Christian faith was being harmed by this disagreement and how much danger the opponent's opinions posed. He needed to explain how free will isn't hindered by preceding and cooperating grace, and whether God's foreknowledge remains according to his purpose, so that the things proposed are accepted as foreknown. These matters can be examined in the 8th chapter of the same letter. So, let them say, those who date 2 of Prosper epigrams against Augustine's detractors to the year 417 or 418, and the poem about the ungrateful to the year 430, whether he, called a divine man in sacred writings, could have rallied the Pelagians to battle with his writing, when in the year 429 he was not yet fully informed about the core, foundations, and arguments of the entire controversy. Did the holy Prosper, unprepared and unarmed, wish to contest with the heretics and, as if overconfident, strive both for the Church's decrees and Augustine's doctrine when he was not yet educated on these questions, and was wavering in his mind among the various interpretations and opinions of the opponents? Such a fictitious and fabricated story is unworthy of such a great man, especially since we understand that in 2 books by Augustine, namely on predestination and on the gift of perseverance, written shortly before his death, the questions posed to him by Prosper, Hilary of Massilia, and the Pelagians had been resolved. Pacidius narrates when Augustine died in the life of Augustine, writing, "In the year 430, on the 28th of August, the holy doctor paid the debt of human life at a time when the Vandals were besieging Hippo for the 3rd month. As I carefully observed all these things, I became convinced, contrary to the views of nearly all previous writers, that the holy Prosper took on the challenge against the Pelagians or their remnants and started to write against them after Augustine had already passed away. Who doesn't know that when the enemies of divine grace and Augustine's detractors were especially active in Gaul, Prosper and Hilary went to Rome to see Pope Celestine. They went to show, with firm and undeniable evidence, how highly the doctrine of St. Augustine was regarded at the Apostolic See. Celestine agreed to their request, as stated in a famous letter in the year 430 to the bishops of Gaul. In this letter, he writes, "We have always held Augustine, a man of holy memory, in our communion for his life and merits, and no rumor of even the slightest suspicion ever tainted him, whom we remember to have been of such great knowledge that he was considered among the best teachers even before by my predecessors." Besides this letter, we read the authorities of the Apostolic See on the grace of God and free will, so that those who spoke against it might understand what they professed to follow and approve. All that the most sacred See of the blessed Apostle Peter established and taught against the enemies of God's grace was done through the ministry of its bishops. We are not currently investigating who collected these chapters. However, the author opposes the more recent dogmatists so clearly in this matter that it shows more clearly than daylight that the Pelagian heresy was condemned and judged by the Apostolic See. The African canons gained as much strength as the Roman bishops gave them when they approved them. These words, which weigh heavily on Canel and his followers and trouble them, are immediately followed by, "It was necessary therefore, to carefully inquire what the leaders of the Roman Church judged about the heresy arising in their times, and what they thought about God's grace against the harmful defenders of free will." We also added certain sentences from the councils of Africa, which the apostolic bishops everywhere endorsed when they approved them. Moreover, Hincmar, bishop of the Church of Reims, in the 9th century, openly acknowledged this need to seek and expect the judgment of the Apostolic See when dealing with heresies against Gottschalk. He would not have referred to these praised words, nor incorporated them fully into his letter, if he did not consider that sentence valid. Furthermore, Hincmar, along with Peter the deacon, Florus the master, Cresconius, Dionysius Exiguus, and Ivo, attributed these same chapters to Celestine, as they are considered part and appendix of that letter. So, these and many other thoughts wandered in my mind, and I firmly believed, contrary to the opinion of all previous writers, that none of the praised booklets were written by Prosper before Augustine passed away. This seemed to highlight Prosper's vigilance, who, to prepare support for Augustine after his death, went to Rome to consult Pope Celestine about his doctrine. But if Prosper had already published or issued the praised booklets, he would have defended his own cause, not Augustine's, before the pontiff. For in Prosper's poem about the ungrateful, there is nothing that was not drawn from Augustine, questioned by the Massilians or Pelagians, and finally, defined in those 10 chapters of the Apostolic See. It's unlikely that St. Prosper aimed to convey the objections of his critics through his 4-part poem about the ungrateful, or that he intended to defend Augustine's doctrine from any suspicion before the judgment of the Apostolic See. What can we say about those 10 chapters of the Apostolic See? Could St. Prosper have imagined them or written them down before thoroughly investigating what the Roman Church leaders had concluded about the Pelagian heresy at that time? Such a notion should be dismissed. So, if in this kind of writing the argument by similarity were valid, I would certainly refer to the book against the collator published by Prosper, which is known to have been written after Augustine's passing. However, the arguments already presented and those soon to come clearly indicate that this work and the poem about the ungrateful should be placed around the same time. The distinguished Cardinal Peronius, who was well versed in the works of ancient Catholic poets and wrote extensively in their defense, stated that they often expressed in prose what they had composed in strict form elsewhere, a point made clear by St. Paulinus of Nola, whom he discussed. We believe this reasoning applies particularly to Prosper's poem about the ungrateful, as he didn't include anything in it that he hadn't also conveyed in prose in the authorities of the Apostolic See or in his other works. The supreme authority of the Apostolic See is strongly and clearly supported by these poems, where it is celebrated. The Roman See of Peter, which was the first to cut off the creeping plague, has become the head of pastoral honor in the world, and holds by faith whatever it does not possess by force. In the book against the collator, the author details a series of events, listing the judgments made by the Roman popes against the Pelagians. He maintains a chronological order, starting from Pope Innocent and continuing up to Pope Celestine. He connects this to our focus, stating, "Through this man, namely Celestine, The opportunity for slander was removed from those in Gaul who criticized the writings of the holy Augustine. When the actions of those seeking advice were taken, and the books that displeased the misguided were praised for their piety, he used holy speech to express what should be thought about their authority. He clearly declared his disapproval of the novelty of this presumption, where certain individuals dared to insolently rise against the teachers and oppose the preaching of the truth with undisciplined slander. Augustine, in the third part of his poem on the ungrateful, reprimands the wicked detractors, refuting the objections of the Pelagians and semi-Pelagians. They loudly complained that all freedom of choice was taken away and that neither punishment was due to vices nor rewards to praise. It has been clearly revealed that Augustine's detractors shouted these things after his death, so there is no need for us to dwell on this longer, especially as Photius supports us in the library, Codex 53, and Vincent of Lerone, in the last chapter against heresies.
Chapter 4.
Arguments from previous writings are extracted. 1. Even though I've outlined all these points in chronological order in the previous chapter, it may seem as if I've achieved nothing unless I delve into the works of Joseph Anthelmaeus, Usher, Cave, Martin Stiart, Father Solinus, and others. They present only one piece of evidence from St. Prosper, taken from chapter 3 of the poem on the ungrateful, to convince themselves that this work was written while Augustine was still alive. Here's how St. Prosper describes it. How could a holy council proceed to another end, where Aurelius was the leader and Augustine the mind? Whom the grace of Christ, overflowing like a horn, gave as a light to our age, ignited indeed from the light. For his nourishment, life, and rest is God, and all delight. His only love is Christ, his only honor is Christ, and while he attributes no good to himself, God becomes everything to him, and wisdom reigns in the holy temple. Father Solinus notes that Prosper celebrates the excellent master as if he were still alive, continuously praising him. So why doesn't he speak similarly of other bishops or notable figures in this cause who have already passed away? 2. Martin Stiart, a scholar from Louvain, while enhancing and refining this work, driven by the same line of reasoning, commented on the word reigns. He infers from this word, and others in the paragraph written in the present tense, that these were penned while the holy teacher was still alive. But what could be weaker than such an argument? For if we consider that kind of praise, which nothing more sublime or magnificent can be said of a blessed spirit now reigning with God in the heavens, it surely seems only fitting for a man still living a mortal life with open and shameless flattery. In what sense, or by what reasoning, could Prosper have sung about Augustine when only one Augustine was still alive, whom the grace of Christ, flourishing abundantly, gave as a light to our age, kindled from the true light? Later, after he had passed away, Prosper diligently consulted the apostolic seat to see whether any doubtful rumors had touched him, or if he was of such great knowledge that he should be counted among the best teachers of the Church. For I clearly do not see how these things can be reconciled, especially since a lay person like Prosper, who lacked ecclesiastical authority, would not have presumed to judge the writings of the Holy Father before the sentence of Pope Celestine. Finally, the words of the present time do not concern us, as poets often use their imagination freely, creating images where they describe those who have passed away as if they were present, believing that the dead live on through their deeds and writings. Indeed, Prosper alludes to the heavenly wisdom of Augustine, by which he thwarted, rejected, and overturned the schemes, efforts, and errors of the Pelagians and semi-Pelagians. Therefore, he presents him after death as living through his written works. It is not true that he uses the present tense throughout that whole paragraph, but, wishing to express his thoughts poetically, he sometimes uses the present, sometimes the past, as he describes Augustine's transition from mortal life to the immortal one where he reigns with God. And while he attributes no good things to himself, God becomes everything to him, and wisdom reigns in the holy temple. Do the praised authors with whom we disagree think that this can be properly said about a very wise living person? When has God been known to become everything to the living, so that, still surrounded by mortal flesh, they reign in the holy temple? This discussion is about Christ, the only begotten Son of God, as truthfully asserted by the Scriptures and the Fathers, which is well known to all Catholics. However, if we want to apply such a statement to anyone else, we must contend with the Catholic religion itself. When I seriously considered these matters, I found the opinion that the books praised by Prosper were written before Augustine's passing, before Pope Celestine praised Augustine's writings, or before Julian, the leader of the Pelagians, met his downfall, to be quite weak. The other points made by P. Solinus fall apart when we consider Prosper's purpose and method of discussion. This sacred poet did not aim to commend the 300 leaders who gathered for Pelagius's cause in his poem Ungrateful, but rather intended to attack and criticize the enemies of divine grace. Thus, It's not surprising that, except for Aurelius, the leader of all Roman Africa, and the esteemed teacher Augustine, he kept the names of all the others silent. This is especially true since, in prosper time, the names of those same fathers could easily be found in the Acts of the Councils, which were still available.
Chapter 5.
On the writings of St. Leo the Great against the Pelagians. 1. Now, given the timing and nature of our discussion, it's fitting that we talk about the writings of Leo the Great. In his writings, particularly his sermons, nothing is more impressive than the divine teachings from the Holy Scriptures about the power and gifts of divine grace. After Julian was defeated and the Pelagians were eradicated throughout Campania, with their supporters in Rome finally silenced, what better topic could a pontiff of such stature discuss and persuade the gathered people about during the sacred mysteries? Thus, during the year's greatest solemnities, he consistently addressed the Roman citizens, dedicating at least part of his speech to exposing and overturning the errors of the Pelagians and other heretics. In these discussions, he sometimes describes the weakness and frailty of natural powers, while at other times he emphasizes the supreme power of divine aid, which is crucial for achieving eternal happiness. He often explains, using evidence from the Apostle, the Gospel, and other sacred scriptures, that all descendants of Adam remained corrupted by the sin of disobedience. Then, he describes the greatest work of divine mercy. Through the cross and death of the only begotten Son of God, the price of our redemption was paid, the chains of sin were broken, and, having cast off the yoke of infernal captivity, the gates of paradise were opened to them and all the sons of Adam. What more needs to be said? 2. Therefore, the Holy Pontiff constantly seized every opportunity to attack the Pelagian doctrine. So that if any among his listeners doubted the Catholic truth and the decrees of the Apostolic See, they would, overwhelmed by the strength of the arguments and convinced by the authority of the apostolic message, no longer hesitate to condemn Pelagius, Celestius, and Julian along with their errors. The main reason he encourages people is to ensure they don't rely too much on their own righteousness or doubt God's mercy. Almighty God, to highlight his grace in him speaking about himself, bestowed gifts upon him without any merits to justify them. In the following prayer, after describing the weakness of human nature, he adds, "And yet we do not despair, nor do we give up, because we rely not on ourselves, but on him who works in us." To prevent anyone from misconstruing these words as suggesting that human free will is entirely crushed by sin, he clarified with a remarkable statement. He gives us what we need to work with him, lighting the lamps of our minds and setting us on fire with his love, so that we may love not only him but also everything he loves. Elsewhere, he compares human hearts to a field. If left in lazy idleness and neglect, the land will produce no noble crops and will be overrun with thorns and weeds, yielding not what should be stored in barns, but what should be burned in flames. Explaining this allegory, he passionately declared, "This field, beloved, is fortified by the grace of God from above, strengthened through fasting, sown with alms, and made fruitful with prayers, so that in our planting and watering, no root of bitterness may sprout, nor may any harmful plant grow, but the joyful harvest of virtues may flourish, with every seed of vice destroyed." Here, the holy bishop speaks on behalf of the sacred overseers who are appointed as workers in the Lord's field. Furthermore, in his 17th sermon, the holy bishop teaches that the sacred washing of baptism heals the weakness and corruption of human nature, which the authors of the Pelagian Heresy stubbornly denied. Nevertheless, even after being healed from the original sickness through divine help, one cannot solely rely on their own strength to remain steadfast. In this mortal life, we're never completely immune from straying from the grace of justice we've received, and often, we do stray. Our nature is changeable and mortal due to the stain of sin, and even though we're redeemed and reborn through holy baptism, we're as susceptible as we are inclined toward worse things, potentially corrupted by carnal desire if not fortified by spiritual help. As these golden words suggest, just as there's always a reason to fall, there's also always support to stand firm. Thus, our most holy Leo could not have received anything more pleasing and beneficial than the duty of continually criticizing and opposing heretical sects while instructing the people to beware of their errors. It's no wonder then, that in almost all his sermons, he criticized the Pelagians and attacked this heresy with such strong reasoning and the authority of the Scriptures that he led many to repentance. The reader should consult the first sermon on the Nativity of the Lord, which the Roman Church has always kept in its breviary. Does he not call Christ the Redeemer of not only all people but even infants in the first chapter? Indeed, he asserts that Christ is the destroyer of sin and death, who, just as he found no one free from guilt, came to set everyone free. And shortly after, using the words of Job from chapter 14, verse 4. "No one is pure from stain, not even an infant whose life is only one day on earth. he overturns one of the fundamental articles of this heresy. He also challenges Pelagius directly with all his eloquence in chapter 5 of Sermon 5 on the Nativity of the Lord, who, with arrogance and pride under the pretext of defending human freedom, taught that Adam's fall only harmed himself, while other humans are born in the same perfection of nature in which Adam was created by God. On the contrary, the Holy Pontiff teaches that this sacrament is central to the Catholic faith. All people perished in Adam, so unless the Word of God became flesh and lived among us, and unless the Creator himself joined creation and renewed humanity's ancient state with a new beginning through his birth, death would reign from Adam to the end, and an unbreakable condemnation would hang over everyone, as simply being born would be the reason for everyone to perish. To briefly touch on countless other references, readers should consult the 6th Sermon on Epiphany, chapter 4. After describing the fragility of human nature, which frequently falls into sin, it is shown that one should resist deceptive pleasure, because there is no sin without enjoyment. Therefore, amidst so many temptations of the flesh and with human nature surrounded by infernal enemies, a person can find no help or protection unless they turn from carnal desires to spiritual refuge. A mind that knows its God turns away from the enemy's bad advice. However, anyone who has taken pleasure in carnal indulgences and is overwhelmed by enemies, bound by the chains of sins, should never feel secure in escaping punishment, because if they miss the opportunity for repentance, they will not have a chance for forgiveness. They should not rely on their own strength to rise or justify themselves by natural impulses, as the crowds of the Massilians and semi-Pelagians wrongly believed, but should seek refuge in God's mercy and ask him to break the chains of bad habits, for he lifts all who fall and raises those who are cast down. Then the prayer of the confessing person will not be in vain, for the merciful God will fulfill the desires of those who fear him and will grant what is asked, as he provided the means to ask. Furthermore, more openly and strongly, he criticizes and reproaches these same semi-Pelagians and Pelagians in the last Sermon on Epiphany, chapter. When discussing true and heavenly virtue, he claims it doesn't exist and can't have any divine quality unless visited by the Spirit of the Creator. For the Lord, speaking to his disciples, said, "Without me, you can do nothing." Therefore, he immediately adds that it's certain a person doing good receives both the effect of the work and the beginning of the will from God. Finally, in Sermon 13, the 45th of Lent, he presents new arguments to dismantle the Pelagian and semi-Pelagian heresies. He shows that men's hearts become the temple of the living God through the power of the heavenly Spirit, using the example of man-made houses. With commendable diligence, they ensure that if anything is damaged by rain, storms, or age, it is restored to wholeness. He emphasizes the need to constantly care for our souls to prevent disorder or impurity. Moving from human to divine matters, he marvelously reasons that our building cannot stand without its builder, nor can it be safe unless protected by the Creator. Yet, because we are rational stones and living material, our Creator builds us in a way that involves our cooperation. Leo does not exclude the effort, cooperation, and free consent of the human will, supported by divine aid. Unlike Calvin, Jansen, and Cannell, who improperly and excessively asserted otherwise, he did not teach that a person's free will is like a lifeless stone, but rather that when stirred by divine grace, it should not withdraw from obedience to God or fail in the goodness necessary to be truly good. Therefore, the same Holy Pope adds these words to the praised ones: "Let human obedience not withdraw from the grace of God, nor lack that goodness without which it cannot be good. And if anything seems impossible or difficult in fulfilling commands, do not rely on yourself, but turn to the one who gives the command, who gives it to awaken desire and provide accomplishment." Meanwhile, as I was writing these things down, I was so delighted that I could hardly refrain from recounting many other similar ones, but I needed to leave them out so as not to overuse the patience of my friend, the reader. However, our most holy Pope Leo has many other statements full of apostolic vigor and authority, which not only once struck and restrained the Pelagians and semi-Pelagians, former enemies of divine grace, but also challenge and press others like Calvin, Jansen, and Cannell, cutting through their gatherings. Now, indeed, it is necessary to discuss other writings of the great Leo, and we will attempt to do so in the following chapter.
Chapter 6, discussing the letters of Saint Leo the Great to Januarius, Bishop of Aquileia, written against the supporters of the Pelagian Heresy.
Let's look at how Cannell arranged these letters. Now, let's focus on what Pope Leo established for bringing back into the Church those clerics who left and rejected the Pelagian heresy. By the 4th year of his pontificate, the whispers of Pelagian error were no longer present in Rome or throughout Campania. If, however, someone tainted by this error was still found here or there, They either sincerely repented and renounced their errors, or, at the very least, out of fear of punishment, pretended to profess the Catholic faith, trying to hide their true impiety under a sort of veil. This latter situation was understood to have happened in the province of the Venetians by Saint Septimius, the bishop of the Church of Altinum. He noticed that many clerics in his diocese had only superficially renounced the Pelagian heresy and later, after joining the Catholic community, secretly revived the heresy they had supposedly rejected. He immediately informed the Roman pontiff about this issue through his letters. It is believed by me and all learned men that Septimius's letter has been lost over time. Despite diligent efforts, we have been unable to find it. However, 2 letters from the Holy Pontiff to Januarius, the Bishop of Aquileia and Septimius's Metropolitan, still exist, and in them, the history of events and the decrees of the Apostolic See against the Pelagians can be clearly seen. Regarding the earlier letter, there was long-standing doubt about which Bishop of Aquileia it was addressed to. Early editors, possibly relying on corrupted manuscripts, read the name Nikitas instead of Januarius. Canal later published the title of this letter in a truncated form, omitting both names and simply wrote, "Letter to the Bishop of Aquileia." However, he claims to have followed Crabbe, Picard, Isidore, the Cologne edition of 1551, and several manuscripts on this matter. But we, guided by the authority of 2 Vatican copies, a Florentine archetype, and another high-quality Vallicellan manuscript, have introduced the name of Januarius. We're also supported by the Chronicle of the Bishops of Aquileia manuscript in the Vatican Library, marked number 5286, where it states, Januarius was ordained in the year of our Lord Jesus Christ 443. To this Bishop Januarius, St. Leo writes, instructing that bishops and others in the clerical order, wishing to return to Catholic unity from the Pelagian and Celestian heresy, should not be reinstated in their positions unless they publicly renounce their errors. In the same chronicle, written by D'Angelo, it similarly states about Januarius. He was born in the city of Pola in Istria, educated in Catholic disciplines, and as a bishop, he used his wisdom and teaching to keep the people under his care, despite many difficulties due to ongoing persecutions, free from errors. In his praise, Pope Leo says, having read the letters of your brotherhood. With these words, Leo began another letter, which was written in the year 447, as clearly indicated by the consular note. But since we intended to first discuss the canonical sanctions of Leo regarding this case, we wish to begin with what is most suitable to counter the Pelagians and holds the utmost authority of the Apostolic See. This type of letter was divided by Leo into 5 distinct chapters, and in the first chapter, to remove all suspicion and doubt from the mind of the Metropolitan of Aquileia, he not only reveals the name of the accuser, Bishop Septimius, but also attaches copies of the received accusation to this letter and sends it to Januarius. In just a few words, he highlighted all the issues that needed the chief shepherd's attention. Through the report of our holy fellow Bishop Septimius, which is recorded, we found out that some priests and deacons, along with clerics of various ranks who are caught up in the Pelagian or Coelestian heresy, join the Catholic community in your province without renouncing their errors. Following this, our Leo criticizes certain bishops for being too complacent, allowing wolves in sheep's clothing into the Lord's flock. They went against the canons and decrees he issued, permitting erring clerics to leave their churches, where they had either been received or accepted into the clergy, spreading their instability elsewhere, always loving to err and never staying on the apostolic foundation. He quickly adds what kinds of evils might arise from such violations of the canons, harming the Catholic community. Because, he says, those who aren't bound by examination or prejudice of their profession seek this benefit above all, so that under the guise of communion, they visit many homes and corrupt the hearts of many with false knowledge. No one among the many learned men who have studied his writings has yet identified or noted which canons or decrees the Holy Pope wanted to invoke. However, this is very important and should not be overlooked without serious negligence. This makes the supreme authority of the Roman Pontiff in establishing ecclesiastical laws worldwide clearer. It shows the honor with which the statutes of the Apostolic See were received by all pastors of other churches. Therefore, by examining what St. Leo defined in those canons he references, we understood this from both the previously mentioned Aquileian Chronicle and from letters 12 and 13. In the first letter to Anastasius of Thessalonica, chapter 9, it addresses clerics who are deserters and wanderers, stating, no one should welcome or entice a cleric from another bishop without that bishop's consent unless agreed upon as an act of charity between the giver and the receiver. Therefore, if something goes against the province, the metropolitan bishop will compel the deserter cleric to return to his church. However, if he has traveled further, he will be called back by your directive. ensuring that neither greed nor ambition has an opportunity. In another letter to the metropolitan bishops throughout Achaia, concerning the nature and institution of clerical life and the bond of priestly harmony, it commands that what was written to Anastasius be religiously observed. It further insists that no bishop should claim another bishop's cleric without consent, which should be clearly documented in writing. This is because the authority of the canons defines this, and the principle of maintaining unity teaches it, so that the ecclesiastical order does not become unstable due to this freedom. After this, he addressed the same metropolitans of Achaia with words full of apostolic strength. So, dearest brothers, may what we decree with pious intention reach your hearts, so that we, who eagerly wish to maintain the unity of the Spirit in the bond of peace, may see the fruit of our command and rejoice in your love's works. Here, Quesnellus omits what Leo claimed to decree and command, turning instead to these words. Because the authority of the canons has defined this, he investigates which canons the Holy Pontiff referred to. Finally, hesitating, he suggests the pontiff might have referred to the 16th canon of Nicaea, the 18th and 19th canons of Sardica, or even the canons of the First Council of Carthage, but admits no mention of written consent is found in the canons. Why does he assume that this discipline was first introduced by Leo, even though it's not explicitly found in the decrees of previous councils and Roman pontiffs? This oversight should not have been missed by someone aiming to diligently highlight the life and deeds of Leo. However, it's beneficial to set aside these and similar matters for now. We'll address them more thoroughly and clearly when we discuss the titles of Pope Leo's decrees, totaling 49, guided by the authority of Vatican documents. Now, we need to return to the Pelagians, from whom our discussion has slightly diverged. In the second chapter of that letter, St. Leo, aiming to curb the unrestrained boldness of the Pelagian clergy and lead them to renounce their wicked doctrine, instructed Metropolitan Januarius, "Gather a synod of provincial priests among you, and require all, whether priests, deacons, or clergy of any rank, who have imprudently been received into Catholic communion from the association of Pelagians and Coelestians, without first being compelled to condemn their error, now at least, since their hypocrisy has been partly exposed, they should be forced to true correction, which can benefit them and harm no one. Moreover, to prevent anyone from harboring the audacious and cunning plan of concealing the vile poison of that heresy under the guise of hypocrisy, and to block every avenue of evasion and deceit, he ordered that they openly denounce the authors of the arrogant error with their own professions. They must detest whatever in their doctrine the universal Church has abhorred, and embrace and fully approve all the synodal decrees that the authority of the Apostolic See has confirmed for the eradication of this heresy, with full and open declarations and signatures in their own hand." Quesnellus, aware of the weight and importance of these words, tried to defend his weak stance by focusing solely on two phrases from the synodal decrees, while disregarding the rest. He attempted to twist the complete testimony of the Holy Pope into an entirely different meaning, stating, "The decrees of the African Church, particularly those from Milev and Carthage, were initially approved by the Roman popes Innocent, Zosimus, Boniface, and Celestine. They were later affirmed by the Ecumenical Council of Ephesus with an irrevocable decree, alongside the acts of Pope Celestine, in condemning the same heretics." To emphasize the impact of this final point, he praised the synodal letter from the Fathers of Ephesus to Pope Celestine, hoping it would further support his previous claim. Clever indeed, Quesnellus, who blends many things together, gradually diminishes the authority of the Apostolic See and elevates the rights of councils above the Roman popes themselves. But now, tell me, did the Apostolic See confirm the decrees issued against the Pelagians at Ephesus, or not? Either way, he faces challenges. If the authority of the Apostolic See did not confirm them, it follows from Leo's words that Pelagian heretics returning to the Church should not have embraced the open professions defined by that esteemed council for eradicating this heresy. Nor were they required to embrace and fully approve any other synodal decrees with complete and open, personally signed confessions, except those confirmed by the authority of the Apostolic See for eradicating this heresy. But if he claims that these decrees were also confirmed by the Apostolic See, then he contradicts himself. When discussing the Council of Chalcedon, he denies that this power resides in the Roman popes. It cannot be deemed an irrevocable decree if it could have been nullified before the confirmation of the Roman pontiff. So, how did the Council of Ephesus confirm the decisions of previous councils and the actions of Pope Celestine with an unchangeable ruling? The historian seems to be creating a story from his imagination. Nothing was done in that council to strengthen the constitutions of the praised supreme pontiffs. In fact, the Ephesians, motivated by a love for truth and justice, claimed that the privilege of an unchangeable judgment belonged only to the Roman pontiff. They began their synodal letter with these words, It is indeed customary for you to be so renowned in all things that you establish the foundations of the churches with your efforts. Therefore, the fathers of Ephesus did not arrogantly claim the firmness of faith for themselves, but said, "It is customary that the Roman pontiffs are well known in all things and establish the foundations of the churches with their efforts." Could we suspect that the praised fathers of the general councils were unaware of the laws, especially the laws fabricated by certain false teachers in later centuries? They were unaware, I say, because inspired by the divine Spirit, they relied heavily on the guidance, instructions, and decrees of the Roman pontiffs. They did not consider it a serious offense to deviate slightly from them. Rather, when more serious issues arose, they taught and believed that the Apostolic See should always be regarded as the mother and teacher of all other churches. Thus, Quesnellus tried in vain to find a way out for himself, using the words with which the Ephesians concluded that synodal letter, saying, "Furthermore, after the Holy Council had read the commentaries of the Acts on the condemnation of the impious Pelagians and Celestians, Celestius, Pelagius, Julian, Florus, what has been decreed and established by your piety concerning them, we also judged that these should remain solid and firm, and we all decided the same with you, considering them as deposed or condemned." And what escape will he find from these, when he encounters new obstacles and falls into others that bind him even more? The records from the Synod, concerning the condemnation of the impious Pelagians and Coelestians, were simply read and published. The bishops affirmed that what Pope Celestine had already decreed was firm and solid. So what does this mean? Could just reading those records or the unanimous agreement of those bishops, recognizing those condemned and deposed by the Roman pontiff, really have been strong enough to make the apostolic decrees firm and unchangeable if they weren't already? This is a new and cunning fabrication. To discredit its author completely, we need to understand Saint Celestine's purpose and goal in sending these acts to the council. The Roman pontiff didn't send such acts through his legates to the council to gain strength and firmness, but merely to make them more widely known and quickly executed. "We have sent, out of our concern, our holy brothers and fellow priests, Arcadius and Projectus, who are most approved men, and our priest Philip, to be present at these proceedings and to carry out what we have previously decided, and we do not doubt your holiness will give your assent to this. Therefore, there is no mention here of strengthening the decrees of the Apostolic See, only their execution. Since this duty pertains to subordinates and inferiors, it shouldn't be claimed that the acts of Pope Celestine in condemning the Pelagians gained strength and firmness from the fathers of Ephesus. Otherwise, all decrees and laws of emperors, kings, and supreme magistrates would mostly depend on those tasked with their execution. Furthermore, our Quesnellus fabricates much about the African, Milevitan, and Carthaginian canons. He claims much about the decrees of Innocent, Zosimus, and Boniface, which he asserts were confirmed by the same Ephesian Synod with an irrevocable sanction. But what new insight does the reformer bring to the scene? The bishops of the Milevitan Council first realized that no canons had been issued at all, as wiser theologians have understood from the synodical letter to Pope Innocent, as we also noted earlier from Dionysius Petavius. When the esteemed bishops wanted the Apostolic See to be consulted on the impious debates of the Pelagians, they aimed to ensure their silence wouldn't be mistaken for negligence. Initially, they highlighted the new fabrications of heresy without exaggerating their words. Next, they expressed a preference for the architects of these errors to be healed within the Church rather than be cut off from it without hope of salvation, unless absolutely necessary. They identified the greatest falsehood and impiety in the Pelagians' words, yet refrained from pronouncing anathemas on the leaders of the heresy, believing that this judgment should be reserved for the Apostolic See. Because the Lord, the bishops gathered at Milevum began their letter to Innocent, placed you in the Apostolic Seat as a special gift of his grace, providing such a person in our times, it would rather be our fault of negligence if we failed to suggest to your reverence what needs to be done for the Church, than for you to receive them with disdain or neglect. We ask you to apply your pastoral diligence to the great dangers faced by the weaker members of Christ. At the end of the same letter, they addressed Pope Innocent again. We believe, with the help of the mercy of our Lord God Jesus Christ, who deigns to hear you both advising and praying, that under the authority of your holiness, drawn from the clear light of the Scriptures, those who hold such perverse and harmful opinions will more easily yield, so that we may rejoice more in their correction than be saddened by their destruction, most blessed Father. This is what the Milevitan Fathers wrote to Saint Innocent, from which we clearly understand that not only were no canons issued at that time, but also no thought was given to drafting them. However, let's imagine that Quesnel didn't read the previous letter but was instead misled by others, believing those canons, circulated under the name of the Council of Mileve, to be genuine. Why, then, without any authority, does he fabricate the idea that these canons were first confirmed by Pope Innocent and then by the Council of Ephesus with an irrevocable decree? Thus, Quesnel claims a great freedom to speak recklessly, daring to defend as his right whatever most opposes papal authority and the governance of the Church. But let's now turn our discussion to the canons of the Council of Carthage, brought forward against the same Pelagian heresy. What new policies, therefore, are contained in these? Absolutely nothing undermines the authority of the Apostolic See. Indeed, 67 bishops, who met at Carthage after the Council of Diospolis in the year 419, declared that their previous resolutions against the Pelagians to protect the salvation of many and correct the perversity of some were completely ineffective without the reinforcement of the supreme authority of the Apostolic See. Therefore, the Fathers of Carthage say to Innocent, "This, Lord Brother, we thought should be reported to your holy charity, so that the authority of the Apostolic See may be joined to the decrees of our modesty, for the protection of the salvation of many, and also the correction of some perversity." Moreover, collectors of synods noted that the acts of this 304th Council have been lost. However, both among the letters of Augustine and in the collection of councils, the responses of Pope Innocent to the Fathers of Carthage and Mileve are preserved, which undoubtedly leave nothing more constant or firmer to be desired for asserting the rights of the Roman See. Therefore, we cannot overlook what Quesnel completely ignored, lest his cause fall. Thus, Innocent first praises the religious fervor of the Fathers of Carthage, for they have established with true reason, not less now in consulting than before when you declared, who approved that referring to our judgment was necessary. He emphasizes the importance of the Apostolic See, as all of us here wish to follow the Apostle himself, from whom both the episcopate and the entire authority of this name have originated. By following him, we have learned to condemn evil and to praise what is commendable. By upholding the traditions of the Fathers in the priestly office, you recognize that it should not be disregarded, as they have decreed not by human judgment, but by divine sentence that any matter, even from distant regions, should not be concluded without reaching the awareness of this See. This ensures that the just pronouncement is confirmed by the full authority of this See. From there, other churches may draw, like waters from their source, what to instruct, whom to cleanse, and whom to avoid as being stained by uncleanable filth, unworthy of pure bodies. So, doesn't Quesnellus feel struck by these words? Let him, I urge, recognize that these words contain 3 arrows that pierce him, challenging and overturning all his cunning plans. First, the name of the episcopate and all its authority arises from the Apostolic See, which has always been responsible for judging matters of faith. Second, the Holy Fathers, by divine decree, determined that such matters, even if disputed in far-off provinces, should not be resolved without reaching this See, ensuring that the just pronouncement is confirmed by its full authority. Third, all other churches must draw the Catholic doctrine from this unique source of the Apostolic See, from which the wisdom of Christ and the Apostles flows. Do these 3 points not clearly invalidate Quesnellus's arguments? How can it be that all the churches of different regions, gathered by their pastors, give strength to the sanctions of the Apostolic See? It is indeed impossible. The members do not add strength and power to the head they depend on, nor can streams of water enhance the clarity and sweetness of the springs from which they flow. Therefore, Quesnellus is wasting effort by claiming that the decrees of the Roman pontiffs issued to the Pelagian offspring were made irrevocable by the sanction of the Council of Ephesus. However, let's set aside these issues for now, as we will discuss them more thoroughly when we talk about the Council of Chalcedon to refute similar arguments by Quesnellus. St. Leo then explains the Catholic doctrines of Christ's grace in the 3rd chapter of the same letter, relying on the testimony of the Apostle to the Ephesians 2:8. He highlights the great weakness inherent in human nature, wounded by original sin, stating that every gift of good works is a divine preparation. No one is justified by virtue before grace, which is the beginning of justice for each person and the source and origin of merits. Furthermore, in the 4th chapter to the same Januarius, he emphasizes carefully fulfilling the duties of a good watchman, so that scandals long extinguished are not revived by such men, and that no seed of the same evil arises from the previously cut-off doctrine in the province of Aquileia. Then, wishing to moderate the rigor of ecclesiastical discipline toward penitent Pelagians, he orders that those who have been perfectly corrected and have shown sincere obedience should be retained in the Church, but those who, abusing the indulgence, resist the commands of the Roman See, he decides should first be expelled from clerical orders and then removed far from the society of Catholics. Finally, in the 5th chapter, he reinstates the full force of that part of ecclesiastical discipline established by both the Holy Fathers and himself. It is not permissible for anyone to transfer from church to church in the rank of the presbyterate, in the order of the diaconate, or in any subsequent clerical office. Anyone who, for any reason, refuses to stay in their designated role and prioritizes their own interests over those of Jesus Christ, neglecting to return to their congregation and church, should be regarded as an outsider, both in terms of honor and communion. As he concluded this letter, he admitted sincerely and with strong words that he would be deeply concerned if his decrees for protecting the canons and preserving faith integrity were ignored. For the faults of the lower orders, he stated, are mainly due to lazy and negligent leaders, who often allow many issues to fester by failing to apply stricter remedies. This decree from the Holy Pontiff is listed last in that manuscript collection, which in the Vatican codices is titled, Titles of Decrees of Pope Leo. It's numbered as 49, Leo the Bishop, concerning the preservation and discipline of the canons, ensuring no one improperly and disorderly presumes to join the clerical state. The praised letter, without a consular date, has led nearly all previous writers to encounter difficulties. However, we could have hardly avoided these issues if we had read it hastily and carelessly, as often happens. As for Canel's opinion, he believed it should be dated to no other time than 444. Dupin, Tillemont, and more recently, Father Bernard de Rubis of the Dominican Order, a distinguished scholar in the renowned work on the monuments of the Aquileian Church, agreed with Canel. However, the eminent Cardinal Norris argued that this letter was written later, suggesting it was addressed to Januarius in 447, indeed before the fourth one addressed to Januarius. Yet, without leaning towards either side, we will still point out the true timing of this letter. As noted before, the Holy Pontiff in the first and fifth chapters of this letter commands that the canons he had already issued regarding the reception of heretical clerics be observed. Here are the rules discussed in both the 12th and 13th letters. Thus, the letter placed 6th in the Canel edition follows those two, the 12th and 13th. Even though the 12th letter lacks a consular date, it's clear from the next letter that it should be dated to the year 445. The following letter, addressed to the metropolitan bishops throughout Achaia, was written on January 6, during the consulship of Aetius and Symmachus, which corresponds to the year 446 AD. It references what was written in the previous letter to Anastasius, so the 12th should indeed be dated to 445. Therefore, the view of Canel, Tillemont, and others who claim that the 6th letter was written by St. Leo in 444 not only falters but completely falls apart. Consequently, we find Norris's opinion more plausible, placing it in the year 447. It's irrelevant that another letter from Leo to Januarius was written in the same year. Why should it be? Is it unreasonable for the Roman pontiff to send 2 letters to the same bishop of Italy within 12 months, particularly in urgent matters like this? Wasn't the last one written at the end of the year 447? Indeed, it was dated December 30th, during the consulship of Alypius and Artaber. Therefore, the pontiff could have written the earlier letter to Januarius either at the start or around the middle of the same year, especially since the distance from the city to Aquileia isn't so great that it would take more than 5 or 6 months for letters to be exchanged. From this, it's clear that these conjectures remain strong, even if another letter to Januarius had been published on July 1, as many manuscript copies indicate. I won't dwell on this well-established matter any longer.
Chapter 7.
On various opinions of authors regarding the previous letters of St. Leo. Our own is established. 1. As we turn to more serious matters, let's briefly address what has sparked so much debate among recent writers. The reason authors have different opinions is because there are 2 versions of the same letter. One was sent to Septimius, the bishop of Altinum, and the other to Januarius, the bishop of Aquileia. They believe these letters didn't match the eloquence, teaching, and style of the Holy Pope. Convinced by this, they strongly argued that one of them should be dismissed as false and forged. However, Norris, in his second book on the history of Pelagianism, attributed both letters to Leo, writing, "Since Januarius replied to Leo, after receiving that previous letter, saying he would comply with all commands, forcing heretics to renounce their error publicly in both speech and writing, Leo sent similar letters to Septimius, informing him of the orders given to Januarius, and to Januarius, congratulating him for promptly following them." When Norris wrote this, Quesnellus had not yet entered the discussion. In the latest edition of St. Leo's works, Quesnellus, after examining the traits of both letters, deviates from the earlier interpretation and vigorously disputes Norris's conclusions, arguing that the letter to the Bishop of Altinum shows many signs of forgery and should not be attributed to our Pope at all. 2. Joseph Anthelmius, however, thought differently, suggesting that the arguments for forgery presented by Quesnellus against the letter to the Bishop of Altinum should actually target the other letter to Januarius, the Bishop of Aquileia, and that this one should be considered false and apocryphal. Who cannot see that we've encountered a complex issue to unravel from every angle? This is particularly the case because later well-known writers like Tillemont, Dupin, and Father Bernard de Montfaucon, among others, tend to be either swayed by one side or the other, or choose to remain neutral rather than make quick assertions. They hope that, over time, the truth, which is not yet fully uncovered, will become clearer as more evidence comes to light. In the meantime, I would confidently say that Norris was accurate in his assumptions. He wrote that both copies of that letter were issued by Leo, with one addressed to Januarius and the other to Septimius of Altinum. It might be understood from this that Metropolitan Januarius was focusing his efforts on bringing down the Pelagian clergy, and that Roman Pope Leo, to whom Septimius had appealed against the Pelagian clergy of Aquileia, had already taken necessary actions to uphold the faith. Furthermore, we believe that such an interpretation of Norris's remarks, praised earlier, can be accepted without any hint of foolishness or falsehood. This approach should not be seen as unusual or contrary to Leo's typical actions. Upon receiving letters from Septimius of Altinum about the spread of the Pelagian issue in Aquileia, Leo sent a copy of these to Metropolitan Januarius. He began the previous letter with the words, "By the report of our holy brother and fellow bishop, which is held among the subjects, we have learned that certain priests and deacons." Therefore, following this example, would it be against Leo's usual actions that, upon receiving Januarius's reply, he would also have sent that along with a copy of the 14th or last letter to Septimius? This was mainly so that Septimius, too, might fully understand the faith, pastoral care, and the instructions and sanctions of the apostolic see of his metropolitan. Leone definitely needed to reply to Septimius, who had sent him the previous report. This was especially important because, after reading the letters from January, Leone recognized the strong faith he had once known. This might have been part of the Supreme Pontiff's strategy, similar to when he had previously entrusted Septimius' report to his earlier letter to Januarius, the metropolitan of the province of Aquileia. After receiving Januarius' response, Leone also passed this on to Septimius, including a copy of the latest letter. This was so Septimius could understand both what had been accomplished so far and what needed to be done in the future to address the Pelagians in that province. However, I think it would be a mistake to doubt the authenticity of this second letter we're discussing, which was addressed to Januarius. It is praised as a genuine work of Leo by the very ancient collector Dionysius Asigus. The Church of Aquileia has always kept it in its archives, as we have already noted from the Vatican Manuscript Chronicle. Moreover, it bears all the marks and characteristics that clearly indicate it was intended for the metropolitan of the province, not a suffragan. While I stand by these conclusions, I won't deny that another copy, which was entrusted to Septimius and perhaps found at some point in the archives of the Church of Altinum, might have suffered some fraudulent alterations. It has its flaws, from which the aforementioned writers argue some signs of falsification arise. Such things include, "We have sent writings to the Metropolitan Bishop of the province of Venetia," and other phrases that immediately follow, so that he may understand what pertains to the danger of his position, which, according to Canel, neither reflect the age nor the style of St. Leo, although they are not so significant that they can be entirely cleared of any suspicion of falsification. First, Altinum was once a very prosperous city located on the coast of Venetia, as established by Pliny, Martial, Livy, and the ancient maps of geographers. So, those words could easily have been used to refer to the metropolitan area of the province of Venice to clearly identify the province where Altinum was located. This is especially true since, during Leo's time, the metropolitan of Aquileia had cities and bishops from multiple provinces under his authority. The fact that Altinum had an episcopal seat is well supported by the Acts of the Councils. At the Synod of Aquileia in 381 AD, convened under Pope Damasus, Heliodorus, the bishop of Altinum, was present among other bishops from Italy, Gaul, and Pannonia. Furthermore, in 579 AD, at the synod held in Grotto, the bishop of Altinum attended. In the records, we find Peter, bishop of the Holy Church of Altinum, signed these acts. Julius discusses this synod in Volume 5 of Italia Sacra on page 308. The Acts of the Pseudo-Synod of Marano also mention this Peter of Altinum, as noted by Paul the Deacon in Book 3, Chapter 27, when in 589 AD, Severus, the Patriarch of Aquileia, submitted a document of his error. Therefore, Canel must be mistaken, as he boldly wrote. The record of the episcopal seat of Septimius remains as obscure as if this letter had never been made known. The forger of the letter attributed that seat to Septimius based on what suited his fraudulent purpose. Julius found nothing about a bishop of Altinum named Septimius in ancient records, as there is no mention of him in Italia Sacra. How cleverly Canel deceives, demanding testimony from Julius to assert the episcopal seat of Septimius at Altinum. If he follows Dandolo, he only begins the account from the destruction of Altinum when Bishop Paul moved the seat to Torcello. However, both Dandolo and Julius are mistaken here, as they claim Bishop Paul made this transfer in 631, and say he died the following month. In the Acts of the Roman Council under Pope Agatho, we find Paul, Bishop of the Holy Church of Altinum in the province of Istria, similarly signed this proposal, which we unanimously constructed for our apostolic faith. This council took place in Rome in the year 680, a fact that's likely well known, and no other bishop by this name appears in the Eugelian catalogue. The phrase province of Istria isn't problematic. Earlier, when Italy was under distress, and while Leo was alive and Aquileia was besieged and destroyed by Attila, king of the Huns, it was later disturbed by the Gothic invasion and other barbarian attacks in the 5th century. Finally, in the year 579, the bishops of Aquileia, unable to withstand the threats from the Lombards, moved the metropolitan seat to Grado by the decree and authority of the Roman pontiff Pelagius. Grado then became the metropolis of all Venetia and Istria with the agreement of the suffragan bishops. If the bishop of the new Aquileia was called the metropolitan of the provinces of Venetia and Istria, why couldn't he have been distinguished by the same titles before the old Aquileia faced so many disasters? At that time, the Aquilian bishop was indeed the true metropolitan of the province of Venetia. Furthermore, these words don't imply any forgery or threat to his status. Those familiar with Leo's sixth letter to Januarius will agree that they fit well with the time and style of Leo. However, your affection should not doubt that if, as we suspect, what we decree for the preservation of the canons and the integrity of the faith is neglected, we will be greatly stirred. He uses these same words in his 14th letter, which indeed suggest possible repercussions and the Pope's future anger if Januarius, the metropolitan, neglected or disrespected the decrees of the Apostolic See. The authority of the early Roman pontiffs in correcting and managing the disputes and issues of lower bishops wasn't confined to just those within the Roman Synod or those ordained by the Roman pontiff, as Quesnellus claimed. In fact, their influence extended widely over bishops worldwide, allowing the Roman pontiffs to admonish, correct, and even exclude them from communion. We could show this with numerous examples from the predecessors of Leo, if our discussion didn't need to stay concise. I urge Quesnellus to consider what our Leo wrote in his letters to Anastasios of Thessalonica, Flavian and Anatolius of Constantinople, Juvenal of Jerusalem, Torribius of Astorga, the bishops of the Viennese province, and Theodoret of Cyrus, none of whom were part of the Roman Synod or ordained by Roman pontiffs. Yet, he either admonishes, corrects, excludes, absolves them from communion, deposes them, or restores them, providing clear evidence. The structure regarding the role of bishops was also established with great order, ensuring not everyone could claim all authority but that in each province, some individuals would have the primary judgment among their peers. Additionally, certain individuals in larger cities would assume greater responsibility, through whom the care of the universal church would ultimately lead back to the seat of Peter, ensuring nothing was removed from the head. From these and other actions, Quesnellus's claim falls apart, that Leo used or was prone to using such threats against metropolitan bishops. Nonetheless, Leo did not hesitate to engage with these bishops, handling cases with Eastern bishops. How much more could he have addressed matters with the metropolitan of Aquileia, directly under the Roman Patriarchate? Yet, Quesnellus returns to argue against Norris, suggesting it proves falsification that those two examples don't perfectly align. In the version called January, some words that seem necessary have been removed. These words are related to the company of the Pelagians and Coelestians. It mentions that for clergy returning from heresy, certain decisions are made in the letter to Januarius that don't appear in the other version. Specifically, it states they shouldn't be promoted to a higher rank, but can remain in their current position. On this point, I don't completely disagree with Quesnel's critique, but I'm not convinced that Norris's conjectures are weak or failing. Quesnel's objections suggest that either one version of the letter has been damaged or somewhat expanded. This isn't easy to verify, especially since the oldest copies, which could offer a clearer and more accurate version of the letter, have been lost.
Chapter 8.
We're examining the letter from the divine Leo XIV to Januarius of Aquileia, and dismissing Quesnel's trivialities. Let's not miss anything about Leo's actions against the Pelagians. Focus finally on the arguments in the 14th letter he wrote to Bishop Januarius of Aquileia. To begin with, there's no reason to worry that Januarius didn't follow Leo's instructions precisely. Leo understood from his response that he had diligently worked to reprimand the Pelagian clerics. Therefore, to encourage and further motivate this vigilant shepherd, the Holy Pontiff congratulates him for vigilantly executing the pastoral care of Christ's flock. He ensured that wolves, disguised as sheep, do not harm the innocent with their savagery. Not only do they not improve with correction, but they also corrupt what is healthy. It is clear that the Holy Pontiff intended to criticize and attack the Pelagians with such phrasing. Indeed, he began the first chapter of the 6th letter with a similar allegory and almost the same words, as we noted in previous annotations. He then adds that it pertains to the danger of the soul if anyone who has fallen into the sect of heretics and schismatics, and has somehow stained themselves with the contagion of heretical communion, is received back into the Catholic communion without a legitimate profession of satisfaction. While aiming to remedy these evils, he prescribed very beneficial rules for Januarius to observe, namely, that Pelagian clerics, according to the constitution of the canons, should lose all hope of higher promotion but remain permanently in the order in which they are found, provided they have not been stained by repeated baptism. Focusing on these last words, Quesnel added this annotation. Perhaps he adds this exception, considering the African canons, where it is stated in the 27th collection of the African collection. Nor should it be allowed that those rebaptized be promoted to clerical rank. A clever annotation indeed, worthy of its author. Should we consider that the Apostolic See intended or was able to address the African canons in cases involving those who were rebaptized? How could this be, when the African bishops, by defending the error of rebaptizing, had already caused a significant and troubling schism? This schism could only be resolved by allowing a new baptism for those entering the Church from heresy or who had been baptized by heretics. The Apostolic See, diligently working to prevent and eliminate this error, refused to associate with those who practice rebaptizing. It would not permit those who were rebaptized to be promoted to sacred clerical orders. This is similar to those who were baptized on their sickbeds, known as clinic baptism, during the same century. Even if they were not tainted by sacrilege like those rebaptized, they were still barred from sacred altar ministries by the church law enacted by Cornelius, as Eusebius mentions. Therefore, those marked by repeated baptism were even more affected by this flaw or impediment of irregularity. This was particularly true during that century, first under Cornelius and then under Stephen, the Roman pontiffs, when the issue of rebaptizers had already been settled but then resurged among the Africans. Suppose nothing was defined by these two pontiffs, what then? Would Quesnellus perhaps disregard what the Roman Synod established under Pope Damasus? It's unfortunate that those acts have not survived, but the synodical letters of those fathers remain. Through these letters, we learn that the sacrilegious rebaptizers were once again causing disturbances across Africa. Even though Emperors Gratian and Valentinian had expelled them, Claudian was ordained by those expelled in 363 and sent to disrupt Rome as if he were a bishop. Since the fathers of the Roman Council rejected both the crimes of rebaptizing and the ordination of rebaptizers, how could it be that at that time the laws of irregularity did not apply to those rebaptized in the Roman Church? Quesnel's crafty note falls apart as he subtly tries to convince readers that the Apostolic See sometimes became a servant to other churches, borrowing laws and canons from them. He then attempts to invent arguments from his imagination, allowing him to claim for the Roman Church the code of canons that he published in the second volume of the Leonine works, adorned with notes and dissertations. However, this deceiver should note that the synodical letter from the Roman Council was written to the emperors at a time when the African Canon 27 hadn't yet been conceived. That canon is dated to the year 378, while the mentioned canon was issued in the Fifth Council of Carthage in the year 398. If Quesnel refuses to believe this, he should at least agree with Basil, who, in his letter to Amphilochius, chapter 47, 311, asserts that the Roman Church had its own canons in the cases of rebaptizing. Now, let's return to Leo, who, before closing his letter, congratulated Januarius for his strong faith and suggested some other actions, which Quesnel has already stirred up a storm of contention over. Therefore, St. Leo instructed the Bishop of Aquileia to join his efforts with the arrangements of the Apostolic See and ensure that what has been commendably suggested and ordered for the safety of the whole Church is carried out carefully and swiftly. Here, Quesnel harshly criticizes the author of the book concerning the canonical judgment of bishops. I wonder, he says, at the writer's negligence in misusing both this and the fourth letter's place. The canons, he argues, testify that those returning to Catholic communion from heresy should not be promoted to a higher clerical rank, as Leo's words suggest. Ensure that it is carried out carefully. The author of that book noted that these canons are neither counted among the Nicene ones nor found in the entire Code of Justilus. Therefore, there were some other decrees besides the Nicene ones, which St. Leo wanted to bind Januarius to, and which were used by the whole Church in ecclesiastical matters. Because the praised author had added these things, Quesnellus harshly criticizes him, saying, "What laziness is this, that he wanted to interpret these words about canons? Isn't it clearer than the midday sun to the reader that what is said to have been suggested in a praiseworthy manner about the letters full of the vigor of faith, which Januarius wrote, should be understood as being addressed to St. Leo, and that the beneficially ordered things refer to this very rescript of St. Leo, which commands the constitutions of the canons to be observed? Therefore, when Quesnellus attacks the author of this praised book with these words, he adds many other things at the same time, aiming to distort Leo's words to a different meaning, moving further away from the aim of the proposed question. He did not review or reveal the very ancient custom of the Church, nor its canons for receiving penitent heretics. But our Leo is dealing with a particular arrangement or law issued by him for receiving clerics returning to the Church from the Pelagian Heresy, as his phrasing and writing style especially reveal. For although during the time of the Holy Pontiff many sanctions of canons were issued on this matter, none of them, if we exclude this letter of Leo, took away the hope of higher promotion for such clerics because of it. Therefore, we rightfully consider Quesnel's effort in vain, since he claimed that this law could be derived from the 8th canon of the First Nicene Council, for we find nothing in that canon that seems to pertain to this perpetual defect of irregularity or that can resolve this present controversy. The text discusses the reconciliation of the heretics known as the Cathars, with the Holy Synod deciding to show them leniency. It was decided that their clerics, if removed from their positions and placed among the laity, should not receive the same communion as lay people, unlike the Church's usual practice with followers of other heresies. Therefore, if these words contain or present nothing beyond this form of indulgence or leniency, regarding those who call themselves Cathars, meaning pure, if at any time they return to the Catholic and Apostolic Church, it seemed right to the Holy and Great Synod that, after the laying on of hands, they should remain in the clergy. It would not mean they are removed from their position or unable to be promoted to higher orders in any case. This latter point was defined by St. Leo in the letter we are discussing. He intended for these clerics to be perpetually bound by the penalty of their previous heresy, but the Nicene Synod of 312 only decided to show leniency to the Cathars by allowing them to remain in their positions. If Quesnellus had considered these two very different matters, he would never have written so freely that Leo's words aligned with the 8th canon of the Nicene General Synod. The canon contains nothing that corresponds to these Leonine sanctions, says nothing about perpetual stability in the accepted order, and says nothing about the removal of hope for greater promotion, all of which were suggested commendably and ordered beneficially by Leo for the safety of the entire Church. To finally clarify the dispositions of the Holy Pontiff, we present his words, regarding whom we also command that the constitution of the canons be preserved so that they consider it a great privilege if, after losing all hope of promotion, they remain in perpetual stability in the order in which they are found. Quesnellus then incorrectly argues, asserting that in Leo's time, only the Nicene 8th canon existed for receiving clerics returning from heresy to the Church in their orders, and therefore he referred to that Holy Pontiff. It's not fitting for someone who claims extensive knowledge of Church discipline to speak in such a manner. The issues addressed by councils and Church Fathers before the papacy of Leo were established, as compiled by the Fathers of the Second Council of Nicaea in 787. In the first session of this council, when discussing the reception of repentant heretics, nothing was decided without consulting the ancient records of the Church. Therefore, John, a presbyter and monk, and a delegate of the Antiochene See, proposed a way to settle the controversy to the Sacred Assembly. It has been widely discussed. He specifically addresses the very Holy Father Teresius the Patriarch about how those returning from heresy should be received. Because of this, John said, "We suggest that the Sacred Synod orders the books of the Holy Fathers to be brought so we can understand and consider what procedures should be maintained in receiving them." Then it was ordered for the books to be brought. The reading of these books didn't start from the 8th canon of the Council of Nicaea by Constantine, the notary of that patriarchate, but began from the 53rd canon of the Apostles. The older interpretation is, if any presbyter does not receive but rejects one who turns from sin, he is deposed, for he offends Christ, who said that joy arises in heaven over one sinner who repents. Since this canon extended indulgence to all generally repentant heretics, whether they were lay people or clerics, Teresius immediately asked, "Is there another canon regarding this matter?" Then Constantine, the notary, immediately recited the 8th canon of the First Council of Nicaea. But when Theodorus of Catana, bishop in the province of Sicily, attempted to apply this to the newly arisen heresy of the Agimarchs, Teresius ordered an inquiry into other canons. Why did the same notary of the Sacred and Ecumenical Council of Ephesus read the 3rd canon? If any clerics in any city are banned by Nestorius and those who follow that doctrine because they have erred, we have judged it right for them to regain their rank. After this, the Fathers were uncertain about whether those returning from heresy should be received into holy orders. Therefore, Stephen the monk, carrying letters of the divine Basil on this matter, read the letters he wrote to Amphilochius about the Encratites, then others to the Evesenians, and those letters to the bishops of the West that are more relevant to our matter, which included a speech about Eustathius of Sebaste. He indeed had fallen into Arian heresy multiple times, and when Hermogenes the bishop accused him and criticized him for his false doctrine, he confessed a sounder faith and thus received the laying on of hands from him. After Hermogenes died, Eustathius defected again to the Arian side of 313. But expelled from Constantinople and returned to Sebastia, he made a defense, cleverly hiding his impious views and pretending to speak words that seemed correct. He easily attained the episcopate. While many other examples of his deceitful behavior could be mentioned, which would burden the reader's mind, we only ask how the impediment of irregularity we are discussing could have been defined in that 8th Nicene canon? Didn't Eustathius's ordination occur long after the Nicene Council? It should at least be placed in the year 376, which is 51 years after the Nicene Council. Therefore, in that 8th Nicene canon, it was not addressed that clerics returning to the church would be denied greater promotion. Rather, it was only sanctioned that matters related to their reception and the manner of reconciliation, to be observed through the laying on of hands, seemed pertinent. This definition against the impious Massalians, or Euchites, established in the Third Ecumenical Council, aligns with and supports church discipline. In the Second Council of Nicaea, Deacon Stephen recited this, and its final words add more strength to our current reflections. It pleased all of us, but if anyone has renounced that doctrine, if they are a cleric, they should remain in that position. If they are a layperson, they should be received back into the communion of the Church. In this matter, it is important to note that the fathers of the esteemed Third Ecumenical Council wanted to uphold what was defined in the Alexandrian Synod in the year 362, during the time of receiving back the apostate bishops under Pope Liberius. All these points collectively present the canonical practice of the Church regarding the reception of heretics before the time of Leo. Yet, the Seventh Ecumenical Council provides us with even richer documentation, drawn from the works of Saints Cyril and Athanasius, and found in the ecclesiastical histories of Rufinus of Aquileia and Socrates. These works remarkably clarify our matter and reveal that Canel himself struggled with confusion in evaluating these. Meanwhile, from the series of such numerous testimonies, we have two questions that differ greatly from each other, namely, whether heretics returning to the Church should be received in their orders without being demoted, and whether, having obtained leniency, remaining in their accepted orders would permanently prevent them from advancing to higher ranks. Now Leo's aim, command, and decree have been made known, which undoubtedly, if Januarius had not complied, would have deeply disturbed the Holy Pontiff's spirit. This would lead to some ecclesiastical penalty against him, as the final words of that letter reveal. However, rest assured, my dear friend, that if the measures we've put in place to protect the canons and uphold the integrity of the faith are ignored, we will be deeply concerned. The shortcomings of the lower ranks should be blamed on the lazy and negligent leaders, who often pretend to provide the necessary remedy while actually fostering much trouble. But, joking aside, let the annotator Quesnellus think about this and consider whether any bishop, in matters concerning the safety of the whole Church, has ever addressed other bishops of the entire Christian world with such serious words, full of authority and jurisdiction, as he has boldly claimed. Indeed, bishops from other churches can write, suggest, discuss, and inquire about anything that can benefit the welfare of the whole Church. However, defining and establishing anything for the common good of the Christian Republic itself is reserved only for the Roman pontiffs outside of general synods, as we have shown in this and our other dissertations. Regarding the deeds of January, we certainly know nothing, but it's important to note that all of Leo's orders and decrees were executed so cautiously and swiftly by him that the harmful influence of the Pelagians, which was particularly rampant among the clergy of that province, was almost completely eradicated. As far as we know, no correspondence occurred between Leo and January. Furthermore, due to the challenges of the times, January's report to Leo was lost, and among contemporary writers on the events there, such deep silence is maintained that there's no mention of the deeds. However, another letter from St. Leo to Nicetas of Aquileia, January's successor, written in the year 458, still exists, from which we can reasonably and comfortably conclude that by that time no remnants of the Pelagian influence remained in that province. In this matter, our bishop, authorized by the Apostolic See, addressed 7 proposed questions and guided Nicetas of Aquileia on the remedies needed in these challenging times. This was to ensure that the wounds inflicted on religion by adversity could be healed. However, since these consultations do not pertain to the morals, doctrines, and history of the Pelagians, we will set them aside for now to stay on topic. We will revisit them when we enhance the ecclesiastical discipline of that era with our observations. Meanwhile, we should appreciate the divine efforts of Saint Leo the Great in overturning the Pelagians and abolishing their errors, achieving the desired outcome. To confirm this, we have examined all the ancient records, especially those from the 5th and 6th centuries of the Church, and nowhere did we find any mention of the Pelagian heresy as if it were flourishing at that time. This belief is further supported by the first letter of Pope John IV to the bishops and priests of Scotland, also mentioned by Bede in Book 2, Chapter 19 of the Ecclesiastical History of the English People. In it, the Supreme Pontiff, along with the Roman clergy, addresses two questions proposed by the clergy of Scotland, one about Easter and the other about the Pelagians resurfacing in that kingdom. Regarding these matters, Pope John IV writes, after explaining the reason for observing Easter, they add in the same letter about the Pelagians, and we have also learned that the poison of the Pelagian heresy is reviving among you, which we strongly urge to be removed from your minds as a harmful superstition. The fact that this detestable heresy was condemned should not be unknown to you, because it has not only been abolished for these 200 years but is also daily denounced by us with perpetual anathema. Anyone who considers these words will agree that our belief gains strength. In the 7th century, specifically in the year 640, Pope John IV assumed the highest leadership of the Catholic community following the passing of Pope Severinus. Based on Pope John's testimony, if we subtract 200 years from this year, we arrive at 440 AD. In that year, Saint Leo the Great was recognized as the bishop of the Roman Church, according to the records of the Roman popes. In 640, it is confidently stated that Pope John IV responded to the inquiries from the Scots. Although the letter lacks a specific date, it starts in a way that suggests John was inclined to address the Scots' requests shortly after he became the Roman pontiff. The Scots had already sent their inquiries to his predecessor, Severinus. However, their messengers did not reach the city until 315 days after Severinus' death. This is clearly indicated by the opening words of John's letter. The writings which the messengers brought to the saintly memory of Pope Severinus, after he departed from this world, reciprocate responses to what was requested. Now, setting aside these and similar conjectures, we will end this discussion here. We plan to present many other matters of greater importance in the following parts, ultimately discussing the affairs of Eutychius as the culmination of our studies.